That's unrelated to my talk, but I just made this slide during your discussion with you. I'm kind of trying to understand the confirmatory versus exploratory as well. The way that I see the problem is that, and I will not dwell too much here. This is like a 30-second slide. But we assume that there is this kind of underlying truth that is there. And then this guy imposed constraints over the space of all possible constraints in the universe. One of them that we use a lot is the condition independence constraints since early 90s, I would say. But there are many others, inequality constraints, Verma constraints, and etc. And then there is a space of the compatible structures with these constraints. And the process of search is trying to rule out all the guys that are outside here, outside this yellow area, and give you what I call equivalence class. Then, but in some way, when you're doing confirmatory, I would say or hypothesize that the good scientist is trying to do the same thing. If you have some data of background knowledge that allow you to narrow down the space of models that ideally constraints are imposed over the data, then it should be there. I'm not against search. I'm all in favor of search, but fundamentally speaking, saying that the difference between, as I understood, confirmatory and exploratory is in some way that we have computational power to explore the space of models. I'm from this CS department, I'm not sure if I would like that this should be the fundamental difference between them. But this is just my 2 cents, I would say, of a comment regarding the discussion. But let me start my own talk. Thank you for inviting me. I see familiar faces here, Yuda and Rosa in my PhD committee. It's good to be here back at UCLA. I'll talk about the causal inference in the DataFusion problem that was alluded in different ways during the event here today. And for those of you that were in the tutorial, I will spend the first 20 minutes talk about what we discussed during 5 hours. Then hang in there and don't sleep or just take a nap. And the kind of motivation for why I would like to study causality and why you should join us. This is what I could get from the news. There is this from CNN saying that study that heavy coffee drinking in people under 55, there is this keyword here, linked to early death. Then they want to suggest that there is some sort of causal relationship because they use the word linked to, but they are kind of shy or uneasy to make the bold statement. Then they use this thing that is kind of in the middle. You are kind of lawyerly correct. You can go on, and if you read another paper, you say the relationship of coffee consumption with mortality. Then there is a kind of more subtle relationship between if you should drink coffee or not. I am a heavy drinker, I have to admit. And then you can go on for things that are perhaps more interested for some people here that likes to drink socially, that you have this news saying that alcohol causes 20,000 cancer deaths in the US annually. Then seems to be a kind of devastating kind of news if you appreciate a social drink. But then you can have kind of more mild message saying that 1 drink of red wine or alcohol is relaxing to circulation, but 2 drinks are stressful. Apparently there is some sort of threshold there. And then you can flip that if you're kind of good news. Let's say, why do heavy drinkers outlive non-drinkers? And I'm like trying to be an educated citizen and kind of digest this kind of news. What should I do in my life? Should I watch out for the intake of alcohol, or what would be the implications to my life? You can go on, talk about the grapefruit, if it's good or not, or perhaps association of nut consumption with mortality, or cause-specific mortality. And you see that every X amount of time, every 2 years or 3 years, you have kind of flip of the result of what you do. And here I'm just in the context of the biomedical sciences. But you have kind of similar thing in the domain of the social sciences. Perhaps the gap when you flip is not so frequent, but we have evidence about public versus private school, or new taxation program, or problems of public relevance. Then the question is like, what's going on here? Why they struggle? This is kind of New England Journal of Medicine. For the field of medicine, this is the best journal that you can get. This is kind of the best and the brightest. They are kind of trying to get these conclusions, and they are struggling. What's underneath that? Then my hypothesis, but I think of the field in general, I'm talking as an ambassador of the field in some way, is that there is some kind of methodological struggle relative to the language that they are using and the methods. They don't know how to get causal conclusions so clearly. And I think many people alluded to that in the conference. Then my goal here will be try to give some ideas related to this problem. And in general, I would say that we would like to develop it in machinery that for computer science, this could be a language and understand the properties or conditions on algorithms for performing two different tasks. The first one is learning about population level interventions, ideally by cohesively combining multiple heterogeneous data set. Heterogeneous is kind of overloaded word people use with different meanings. We'll try to define that in a little bit more formal way. And that would be perhaps useful. This is kind of summary, and the title of the talk, and a summary of, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of work around this problem for the population level. If I have time, I'm not sure, I'd like to move from population level for individual level causality. Then you'd like to have idea about deciding individual level treatments by leveraging, hopefully, the population level fused data. This is kind of initial explorations. There are papers that are coming up about that. It is a very important problem. There is a big hype now, a big interest, I should say, in how can you do personalized decision-making or personalized medicine, for example. And, but what does this mean properly? Then my belief is that without understanding causally in a very kind of fundamental way, it's very difficult to make any claim that you pass the small test. But then, towards this goal, let me talk about the DataFusion problem, learning about population level interventions. And this is kind of the example that I like. Suppose that you have this target environment that is the US, that you call population pi star. And you can have non-causal data there, observational data, perhaps you collect through sensors. You go house by house or place by place, and you ask the questions, and you get this huge data set. Your goal is to answer some query that is Q of P star of Y given to X. That is the causal effect of some drug in the US. X is the treatment or the drug or the exposure, and Y is the outcome. Survival after 3 years of taking the drug, or income or salary after 5 years of graduation, and so on. I will stick with Y and X, even though some people may be unhappy here. I understand that there is context, and we'll try to discuss what this means. But going back, then the goal is to do inference about the target population, and you have different data sets coming from that. For example, we have a data set coming from New York that is a survey that resembles the target population. Is also observation, not experimental. Perhaps you are here in LA, in honor of the place that I was, and then you have survey data, but the population was younger. It doesn't quite match the US population, but in some way you would like to use that. Perhaps in Utah, you got a little bit luckier, and you have a randomized clinical trial, RCT there. Assume that everything worked wonderfully well there. However, caveats, this was among paid volunteers, and they are mainly unemployed. Then even though you could get some type of causality there, but it's not perfect. In Wyoming, you have this natural experiment that happened in the university, but it was among young athletes. Then the general question here is like, what are the principles to fuse or to combine all these 8 different data sets that are related but somewhat do not match with the target population or that you are trying to make your causal claim? Then this is the DataFusion problem, how we call. The big picture, I would like to say that I like this, all data is not created equally. This meaning of the heterogeneous data sets is pervasive. I would say that this is what happens all the time. It's never match exactly what you want. But for us, heterogeneous means that data is collected under different experimental conditions. The underlying populations are different in an intrinsic way. The sampling procedure is not randomized. The treatment assignment is not randomized. Many variables are not measured. Then the nice thing that we have formal language to encode a setting in which we are kind of suffering this type of problems. And it's usually called the design, or in a generic way that they call. We are trying to put a more formal way what design means. And also we understand a lot of conditions and we have algorithms to decide what is entailed if you have a data collection that is in the space of these dimensions here. Just to be a little bit more specific, suppose that you have this target, I'm just rephrasing what I said before, suppose that you have this target domain that is the US. You want to compute the causal effect of X and Y in population star, and then you have these different data sets. If you talk about the dimensions that I just mentioned, the population in LA is one of the dimensions, you call dimension 1. This is not quite the same of the population in the US. They have a data set for New York, Texas, and so on. Now we have a second dimension that is the experimental condition. If it's observational, as observation, we know that it means that it was not controlled, the treatment assignment. If it's experimental, importantly, people usually don't talk so explicit, but you need to tell which variable you did the experiment over, what you try to randomize. Then here you try to randomize variable Z1, for example, in LA. Perhaps this could be diet. In Texas, we try to randomize Z2, maybe education, some kind of educational program. And the goal is not to make inference about Z1 or Z2. Note that there is an X here. You want to make the inference about the effect of cholesterol, could be in heart attack. You cannot do experiment in the cholesterol. You cannot open the guy, throw a dial with many levels, and fix the cholesterol of the person. But still, it's a general question. What's the effect of cholesterol? If you say that the effect is high, perhaps there is some sort of implication of how I would design a drug that you try to bring about the level to low. Assuming that you pick the correct variable. It's good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and so on. But that's another dimension, I would say. But that's dimension 2, that is the experiment that you have. Dimension 3 is if you have some type of sampling pressure. For example, perhaps in LA, you have some pressure over age. Perhaps people that is younger, there is an overrepresentation of younger people here in LA, but people that is younger want to report less likely to the study because they don't want to engage in the process, or they don't have landlines, or they just have something better to do, maybe. That's the dimension of sampling. And the fourth dimension is what are you measuring? What are the columns of your data set? Perhaps in LA you measure the first time that you give the shot or the person take the drug, X1, Z1, W, M, and Y1, so on. But in data set 2, you measure X1, X2. You are able to catch the second time that you give the shot. You couldn't do that in the data set in LA. Then the columns may be different. Then this is kind of the face of what heterogeneous means. Given that we are kind of in the same page now, I would like to stop like 5 minutes and give a brief causal inference review that we understand the motivation in order to kind of move on and be able to articulate the results that we have. Again, I would give a 20,000 feet view of what's going on. You take a process-based approach to causality, and the idea is that you assume that reality can be decomposed in these mechanisms. In this case, we are trying to see the effect of education and income, for example, and you assume that there is this mechanism F sub E that is the one that education picks up a value. And here we are saying that the socioeconomic status of the family has some effects how education is being established. And you have another variable, U sub E, that are all other variables in the universe that also affects education and is not SES. That's the meaning of the equation, of the U sub E. Now we have income. We are saying that there is this underlying mechanism, F sub E. This is abstraction that we are getting here. There is this mechanism, F sub E, that takes as argument the education, the SES of the family, and U sub I. Again, U sub I are all other variables in the universe that affect income that are not education and SES. That's nice. Usually, to try to exploit the structure and do perhaps learning or inference in an efficient way, we will see this system in a graphical way to exploit the order relation between the variables. Then we can draw whatever I have here as a graph, a causal graph. And the meaning is quite intuitive from this interpretation that once you have this structural function, then and some variable appears in the argument of the other. For example, education is in the argument of income. Then you have an arrow from education to income. which means there is a possibility that education is variations of education or generation variations are transmitting change to the variable income. Then you also have SES pointing to income, because SES is here, and you also have SES pointing to education, because SES is appearing here. I'm keeping implicit, because it doesn't matter for the moment. Later, I'll relax that, but I'm implicit that for each of the observed variables, you have this U sub, the corresponding variable, generating the randomness of this variable. That's nice. However, such as in physics or in chemistry, that they are trying to get these kind of functions. In the social and biomedical sciences, you never get the function that is there. But what we can get from that is some type of data. You can try to sample from a process that is unfolding like that in time, and then you get traditional random sample, and you get what is called a special distribution, observational distribution, non-causal distribution, P of Z, X, and Y. That's nice, and that's usually what you say, oh, if you're trying to do statistic, you are using this distribution. You are kind of taking a picture, a static picture of what's going on in the population, and you are asking the height distribution or the weight distribution of the population. We don't want to talk about that. This is kind of very well understood, very difficult problem, and there is a lot of people trying to solve the problem. That is about the amount of samples that you have to estimate this guy. I will assume this away. I will assume that the central limit theorem here is working, and you are able to recover this distribution. Later, we can relax that. What we are interested in reality is to understand what will happen when this population undergoes some kind of change. If I want to change the system and perhaps make education mandatory to the population, what will be the distribution of income? Then we'll have this operation that we no longer want people to freely decide if they are enrolling or not their kids, or the kids also deciding together. If the person should join the university, for example, the higher education, you would like to see if, what will happen if this is mandatory, which will be equivalent to replace the original mechanism F sub E with a constant yes. Note that I'm assuming this is usually the question, people get overwhelmed and say, oh, but what about the mechanism of income? Sometimes I have this fat hand, I cannot do a perfect intervention, and people will start crying together in the room. Here, I'm just concerned about the basic block of the atomic clean intervention. But I can guarantee, at least based on my experience, that all more sophisticated results are built on top of this intuition. That's what we are trying to build here. In the same way that you have the graphical representation for the system pre-intervention, you have the same representation, the corresponding representation for the system post-intervention, which is called the mutilated graph, such that X is no longer listening to the variable Z or acquiring the value based on Z, but now there is this yes here that is saying, X, you need to be yes. There's a kind of no variation in this sense. Usually when you talk about causal effects, what you like to make the contracts, you do yes for some people and no for some other people, and you contrast that. Can be a difference, can be a ratio, or whatever functional you have, but you would like to compare these guys. Again, you never see that concretely or touch, but you can sample from a process that was generated in this way, and this gives rise to what we call the experimental distribution or the causal distribution, or interventional. Then this is the famous ZY given do X is equal to yes. The do is a different operator that is just meaning that you go there in the underlying system and replace the original equation by this yes. That is different than if I have written Z comma Y given X is equal to small x. That is just observing the X very naturally. Some type of filtering. If you want, don't get lost. Yes?
I just wanted to understand, so in this diagram you said the new news has subscripts Z, X, and Y. Is there an implicit assumption in this causal framework then that there are no U, X, Y, Z?
Yeah, just in this slide. Later, for all interesting problems that you have, or at least that I have in my bias, the case that you have these U's that are correlated, you have these unmeasured variables. Yes, but here in my example, that's not the case.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, thanks. Very good point. There is another name for this distribution that you can find in the literature if you don't be confused or think that it's completely different. That this is also called the potential outcome. I could have written that as Z sub x is equal to yes, comma, y sub x is equal to yes. Same distribution, just looks like different. The question that you have, kind of one of the fundamental questions consider is like I got data from the left side, from this observational data set, and I want to make the claim in the right side. Under what conditions we are allowed to do that? That's the problem, problem of identification of causal effects. I make more comments. Then you can formalize this notion of that I just put, for example, I can write in a mathematical way, structural causal model M is a tuple with these 4 components. The first one are the set of, as it's called in the economists as well, endogenous variables or observed variables. You have the set of the exogenous variables or unobserved or latent ones. And for each of the endogenous variables, variable in the system, you have this mechanism f sub I, such that Vi is a function of this guy, or passed through this transformation. You pick up value based on a set that you call PAI, the parents of the observed parents of I, or Vi, and Ui, that is a subset of the exogenous variables that is also affecting Vi. And so far you have kind of deterministic system in these 3 guys. Usually you have uncertainty and variability, and to try to summarize that, you kind of spread mass over these exogenous variables that are the variables outside your cut of reality, and you have this P of U. Systems of these kinds are kind of very well understood. You have axiomatic characterization from that in 2 different papers by Halpern, that is a logician, a famous logician in CS, and Gallus and Pearl. Then yeah, I put that to say that we understand pretty well if you do have this system, or if you want to have algebra over this kind of operations, you have kind of solid grounds to do that. Then going back to now you kind of establish the language, then I would like to go back to the data fusion, what data fusion means. Recall, you may be tired now, but recall that we have these dimensions. First one, population. Second one is observational experimental. Third one is the sampling. And fourth one is what we measure. Then what was, at least to me, when I entered in the field, this may be 8 years ago or 7, when I heard causal inference, this means, or this meant, that you fix the dimension population, the dimension sampling, the dimension what is measured, and you collect data in the left side, that is the observational, and you want to make a claim in the right side, that is the experimental. That is the identification problem that I said. This is what people usually call causal inference from observational studies. This is a big deal, a big problem. You would like to relax that or get one step back and get perspective and see if there are other tasks or things that can help with that, and to try to map reality, right, or what perhaps a real scientist is doing. Then you have this other dimension that we called transportability, but it's called in the fields external validity or meta-analysis or some type of generalizability, that basically the baby one is like you fix D2, D3, D4. You could have a different population or different species. Population is just the label. Perhaps I'm collecting data on bonobos or on mice, and you like to make the claim about Homo sapiens. Under what conditions can you do that? Which kind of assumptions will allow you to do these types of inference? You have another one that is a problem very well studied in economics, that you have our take, that's called sampling selection bias. You fix 1, 2, and 4. You have this selective pressure over salary. People that is getting higher salaries are reporting more likely. People that is getting lower is kind of shy and not reporting. Then how can the data is collected here, and I would like to make the claim without this bias. These problems are studied separately. I will discuss from now on this one. I will focus on number 2. But the full real transportability is when you have a collection of data sets that are in this space, what heterogeneous means, and you would like to make a claim about a certain target population without the bias, and so on. The problem of transportability is not defined by me or you. This is kind of discussed for many years in the field. This is a quote by Shades, Cook, and Campbell, that is one of the Bibles in the field, that say that external validity asks the question of generalizability. To what population, settings, treatment variables, and measurement variables can this variable be generalized? You have this by Cox that I like, from the 58 book. Extrapolation across studies requires the important thing, some understanding of the reasons for the difference. Then that's kind of amazing advice, very good idea. The question is like, after you agree with that usually human beings will, how can you move on and try to encode these reasons for the difference in a formal way and see if the analysis is allowed? Perhaps if the differences are so huge, perhaps a theory to say not possible to do it. If the differences are not so huge, I'm comparing with bonobos and humans. If you do experiment about the digestive systems, perhaps it's okay to use the data from bonobos because it's so close. But if you talk about the cognitive system, can be a little bit more tricky. Not so much, but it is more tricky. Then under what conditions can you do this inference? And there is this one by Manskin that is taken as real. Someone mentioned yesterday, I think. I may have left, but let's say the experiment said to have external validity if the distribution of the outcomes realized by a treatment groups is the same as the distributions of outcomes that would be realized in an actual program. It's some sort of definition, but there are problems with that, or it's too stringent. But that's a good starting point. Then let me write in a little bit more explicit way how I see the problem, given that I'm giving you a lot of words. Is it possible to, research question, is it possible to predict the effect of X, exposure or treatment X, on the outcome Y in a target population pi star, where potentially no experiments can be conducted, using experimental findings from a different population pi? Sometimes it's possible, and the goal is to understand when and how this is possible. It sounds like a baby problem or kind of innocent, but it turns out to be not very innocent. It's a very strong generalization problem. And I would say that this is the picture that I like, that is like, this is very related to what even scientists in physics, or I would say chemistry more, are doing in reality. You have this lab that is this baby place, a small environment, that the guy can put the hands in the system, shake the system, do experiment here, there, or do whatever he or she wants. Then he has complete control over this baby space. However, the goal of the scientist, by the way, lab, I'm saying the lab that is the place is just a metaphor for these different names here. Population, setting, and so on. The goal of the scientist is not to make a claim in the lab, but he would like to make the claim outside the lab. One possible hypothesis that is kind of the dream, kind of very pink world, idealized, H1, is that lab and outside the lab are essentially the same. The structure, when I look at this graph, I see that this is the cut of reality, and there is this underlying mechanism there. And you are saying that the mechanism is the same, it's just a matter of scale. If that's true, from a theory that will try to handle this type of generalization, everything is assumed to be the same qualitatively, then it's trivially transportable. You just copy the result that you have in the lab, and this will hold automatically outside the lab. Easy and will not happen in reality in general. The other side of the spectrum, that is a second hypothesis, that lab and outside the lab are completely different. Now I add a little bit of notation here, in a kind of amuse you a nice way. You have these yellow arrows here. And the yellow is just meaning, or the lack of yellow, but this system here is meaning that underlying functions, when you see this graph, the mechanism f of z is different than f of z star. F of x is different than f of x star. F of w is different or potentially different than f of w star, and so on. Then this is the nightmare case that I say I have no clue about the relationship between the lab and outside the lab. Some people think that this is also a difficult setting, but it's a trivial one from the theory. Because if you have no clue, the theory should say nothing can be learned. Because this is potentially heaven, and this is chaos. How can you say any claim? I don't have any invariance between source and target. Not possible. Usually the literature is kind of oscillating between these two guys, which is too strong. There is the whole spectrum between them that we would like to understand. And I think this is how people in reality react as well, given that we make progress and science advances. And I don't believe that we are oscillating between these two. It wouldn't be possible. Yeah, let me not make more comments. Let me pick one example that what could be in between these cases. What can motivation question, what can experiments in LA tell us about the experimental effect in the US? Then you have the source population pi, that is LA, and the target population pi star, that is the US. Now I have this overlapping between two causal structures, such that you have the variable x, that there is this arrow, the x is treatment or the decision, z is the age that is kind of modulating that, and also is affecting the outcome. Perhaps people that is older, if you're in the medical setting, there are other causes competing to try to kill the person. Then there is this arrow from z to y. Then here the assumption in this model about the yellow arrows that we remove an arrow pointing to y, which we are making an invariance statement that after you added age to the system, the biology, at this point, biology is the same, and the f of y is equal to the f of y star. We don't know exactly what's the mechanism, but based on our knowledge, you know that this is shared. And we don't know anything about that. We're not making a claim given that the yellow is here. Arrows don't mean anything, by the way. Don't be scared. The lack of the missing arrows or bidirected arrows or yellow arrows, those are the ones that are making the statement. That's good. This is kind of our qualitative input about the relationship between source and target. Now you have quantitative input, data. In the left side, now in the source, you are able to run this experiment. You spend $5 or $10 million, everything went, Angus left, but everything got right. You got very lucky, you spent our money well, and you got the y given to x comma z, the effect of x on y for each age group. Great. This is in LA. In New York, you get an observational study, p star of x, y, and z. Turns out there's a side note here, I put parentheses. Implied by this structure, you see a difference in the distribution. The age distribution, p star of z, will be different than p of z. This is implied by reality. If you are trying to do learning, this is one example of what can be leveraged to try to learn this diagram and these yellow arrows. Input, qualitative understanding about the domains, and two pieces of quantitative evidence, data in the LA experimental, the observational data in the US. Output, this is computer science mind, right? Output, input, output. This is like our bread and butter. We want to estimate the effect of x and y in population star. How do you do that? Does this assumption allow us to combine these data sets and answer this question? It turns out that is yes, and this is the transport formula, how I call, that basically you get the effect of x on y for each age group, and we reweight that by the age distribution in the target, in the US. We are very happy, Yuda and I, when we were around this paper, that then someone came and gave us the reference that this formula is well known, not with this syntactic notation, but for more than 200 years. This is how they adjust, depending on how collected data. What was good is kind of the beginning of the PhD, and the question that we have underlined that, is this formula universal? Does this hold for any possible setting, any possible structure, or the structure is just encoding reality. For any possible reality, any possible data set, this will be true. This formula will be true. That's kind of our question, our endeavor, and when we started. Because this was the belief before 2011. If you read Childish, Cook, and etc., Campbell, and Mansky. Let me just, I already said that is a what it means to have this diagram that is the overlapping of two diagrams. I have more 10, then I need to go a little bit faster. But in some way, related to the more fundamental discussion, those what I like to call the anchors of invariance. Because as discussed yesterday, apparently people say, oh, the anchor is the causal effect. No, the causal effect is implied. This is I added in the slide. The mechanistic invariants that are coming from this point imply causal invariance. That is invariance in this case of the Z-specific, the age-specific effect. But anyways, the mechanisms are the ones that are allowing us to do that. Let me give you yeah, 10, good, thanks. I just got the graph that we have before, the triangle. Now, in our friend from Google, I added the bidirected arrows. The bidirected arrows to us means that the latent variable here, the source of randomness of X and Z are correlated. That's the meaning. Then there is also correlation. There is unmeasured confounding between X and Y as well. If it didn't, at least in this setting, our problem will be trivial. What makes things more interesting that you have this observed relation and you don't know what's making that to happen. It turns out that if you, and I'm just copying the data sets from the previous slides. This is the data set in LA, and this is the data set in the US, the observational data in the US. It turns out that if you run the analysis, you see that the transport formula is the same regardless of the bidirected arrows. Now the question that you ask, that we are trying to challenge or understand, I would say first, the view of universality of the transport formula that was given before, is like, is this true always? Then you come up with a different structure, baby variation, one-step variation from the original one, such that we are saying that someone is screwed up, and they don't measure the guy on the top that was age, but they measure this guy Z here that is a proxy for age. Could be language skills. Age goes up, these skills go up. Now the question is, how do you combine the data? You have these two data sets here, LA and US. How do you combine? Can you use this kind of reweighting by the age distribution? Many of you were here in the Sunday, with our delightful Sunday afternoon. You can see by this separation that this S, that is in some ways encoding the source of variations, this invariance in the functions. When you condition on Z, you note that there is a collider here from age that is not measured, S pointing to Z, and H pointing to Z. Then you condition on Z, you are kind of opening this path here, S, Z, H, Y. Then we are directly introducing bias or heterogeneity in your estimate of the causal effect. Then, no, it's not a good idea. And you can see that the yellow arrows are unrelated to the causal relationship between X and Y, because the do X in the target, you remove the incoming arrows to X. Then this guy is not here, and this guy is unrelated at all, because it's marginally unrelated when you don't condition on Z. Then it turns out that transport formula for this case is just go to the data set in LA and just get the marginal effect, Y do X. You can go on and try to be a little bit more sophisticated. Some people is scared about doing post-treatment. Suppose now that you have the same data, observational data at least, and Z is a biomarker. It's coming after you get the treatment. This could be cholesterol. And there is disparity there here. There is this yes here. And the question now is, first, should I discard completely the post-treatment? If you do, there is no way that you can use the data sets. I can tell you that. We can discuss in the paper offline. But we don't want to do that. We want to leverage the structure that we have. Then how do you do that? Do you use transport formula A or transport formula B? Neither. The transport formula is a different mixture of these two guys. It's kind of delicate how to put this together, but to get the effect of X and Y for each age group. And now we reweight by the conditional distribution Z given X in the start population. Then this is kind of obvious to some people in causality. Sometimes I'm embarrassed to talk with my peers, but what we know that some people don't know that the transport formula or how you combine these data sets depend on the causal story, depend on the structure that is relating the overlapping of these two models that is relating the two populations. It couldn't be different, right? But anyways, that's an important point given that people didn't get that apparently at some point. And you have all the variations. Suppose now that the true model is this, there is a bidirected arrow here. That's a negative example. There is no way that you can transport if that's the case. What if I'm just copying this guy and add a bidirected arrow between X and Z? Not possible to do as well. Then our goal is, can we understand when it's possible and when not possible to combine the data set? If it's yes, then we incur in all common problems of computational and statistics, or computation, yeah, CS and stats. If it's no, then we can discuss that. I'm very interested. I'm working a lot in the no answers now. But anyways, that's it. The transport formula depends on the causal story. Let me move a little bit because I just have more 5 minutes. You have general results for that. I'm just giving you baby example with 3 or 4 variables that you can establish some basic understanding, but our goal is give me any graph of any size and form and shape and color, and then we'll try to massage and see if it's possible or not possible to do it. You can do that with multiple dimensions, as I gave the example first. This is the example from New York and LA, that any of the data sets alone will not be enough, but there is some way of combining the data from 2 sources now to 1 target in kind of a clever way, such that to answer the question in the US. Just give you the flavor, impossibility results. Now I would like to make a comment. I'm almost done. But because this was part of the discussion yesterday, I'm kind of rushing to talk about that. That is like about the gold standard. There's a lot of, some people have this illusion that this is the gold standard, and this is even, ironically, let me not be more aggressive, I'm controlling myself. That even the randomized experiment is almost like a definition of causal effect. It's unrelated to reality. It's our mechanic way of getting the thing is the definition, the artifact that we use. But anyways, suppose that before randomization in the left side, this is reality. The data was generated over Z, X, and Y in this way. And this disparity, the F of Z, is different than the F of Z star. This is the yellow arrow here. Now, when you do the intervention, you go to the right side, and people is very happy. I also don't like the internal validity name, but this is the name. And in internal validity, what you get, Y given do X. Now the question is like, what can we do with this distribution that we got from the UCLA hospital? Can you use that to make a claim about the US? Note here that the source of heterogeneity is pointing to Z. If you don't condition on Z, this guy is open, S, Z, Y. If you condition on Z, S, Z, latent variable Y. Then we are kind of cornered here. It's like a puzzle and there is no way out. You cannot use this data in some way to reduce the expression from the source to the target. That's the point. There is no way that you can use because there is no way that you can remove the disparity between source and target in words. Then my comment here is like, I don't think, I would say perhaps people have this illusion, but I don't think that they should. And the irony or the tragedy, perhaps it's more tragedy than irony, and that people are conducting the experiments because they are trying to avoid to engage in the exercise of articulating the model and some knowledge that they have about reality. But there is no meaning to the experiment itself outside the broader context. I have mixed feelings that he's not here, but about the talk yesterday, it's good to have words, context, and let's be careful. But the question now, how can you move on? I agree, 100%. I'm just saying, but then the point is like, my comment is like the gold standard is not so bright, and stronger assumptions about the model are required to validate a causal claim that are beyond the experiment. The experiment is just the location you want to make the claim about the larger structure. Then that's, let me rush here to just my conclusion slide. That's not it, but let me just read this one because I think it's nice summary of the 20,000 feet. The big picture is you have this triplet. You have the query. Perhaps I want to know the causal effect of the ETT, effect of treated, not the treated, or some mediation quantity. I'm sticking with causal effect. It's easy to me. Then I'll get P star of Y given to X. This is the query. I have a model, and I have heterogeneous data sets. Now we are asking, with the current scientific knowledge about the problem that is encoded in number 2, it could be data, it could be substantive for other means, whatever you want. You have the model, and you can test. With the current scientific knowledge about the domain that is encoded in number 2, and the available data that is collected in 3, with all these caveats that you said about what heterogeneous means, Is it possible to answer the research question that is encoded in number 1? And we are trying to understand the logic that will allow us to answer if it is or if it's not. If it is, as I said before, you have, for example, this is the baby one that everyone likes. We have this guy, and then we can engage in estimation, how to be clever about the size of the samples, and computation. That is also very hard. Computation, more than anything hard, it's a counting problem. It's a tough one. But that's the positive one, and you have a lot of machinery how to do that. If the answer is no, you talk with me, because I'm very interested in these ones that I said before. But that's kind of the big picture that we're trying to do. You could do structural learning and do, this is another project that I'm currently working. You can have an equivalence class of models of this kind. Which kind of result can you get? For sure, it's much weaker, because we're encompassing many models, but perhaps it's more realistic. But we start from a fully specified model in this way, and then you can start relaxing it. That's kind of the general idea. Let me move to, this is my last one, I promise. This is just the zoom. Oh, so much good. This is decision making, if you're interested. In 5 hours, I couldn't make it. It's like, I'm not slowing down. This is the animation. Okay. Oh, this is again. Just so. Okay, data fusion from big data, I would say, requires encoding the structural features of the data generating model or your assumptions, combining substantive knowledge and data. Even when the gold standard RCTs is available, it is still not direct to compute the effect of interventions. That is the kind of layer 2, as we discussed, the kind of most basic question that you can ask about causality. There are necessary and sufficient conditions and algorithms that fully characterize sample selection bias that I couldn't talk here today, and transportability when in the non-parametric setting. There are a lot of work not done yet for the other parametric cases that you can get more for sure. I would say that in general, what we are trying to get, or what we are aiming, is like a framework for doing, this is just a fancy name, that is science. I don't like the data, but let me not get there. But pooling and aggregating observational and experimental information spread throughout heterogeneous domains for population that we discuss and individual causal inference. Thank you, and I'm open for questions. 48, I got. Thanks. Yeah, Clark. Oh, you're in my laptop, right? Yeah, just yes. Let me move while I get the.